Hi Ross, I have a question for you based on the recent changes in legislation around, particularly around rent increases, but in general, just the climate in the Scottish private rented sector feeling a bit more positive. Now, there are still other forces at work, but in terms of the supposed flood of landlords leaving the Scottish private rented sector, what impact, if any, do you think the sort of the slight improvement or significant improvement? We can decide if it's slight or significant, but the improvement in legislation for landlords with properties in Scotland, do you think that that's going to stop people from leaving the Scottish private rented sector, or not make much difference, or will there be other factors?
Well, I suppose we have to look at how many people are leaving the private rented sector and look at the stats around it and see
Yeah.
whether this is, because in the media you do see, well, this mass exodus of landlords leaving the sector and the impact it's having on tenants.
Mhm.
And then it's really difficult to actually find data over how many landlords have left the sector. And quite often the articles you're reading are to do with a survey that one particular um, company or body carried out on a poll of people they were thinking of selling up, and therefore, that poll is in,
Extrapolated.
exactly, that is the word. That's the big long word that I was looking for, to see how it goes. So let's have a look at what the Scottish government data says about landlords and how they've left the market. Now, I was looking at some figures that were published. This was published on the 25th of March this year.
Okay. Very
Uh,
good.
it confirms the number of registered landlords and the number of registered properties. And the particular spreadsheet I was looking at went back as far as January 2022. I know some of the data on the Scottish Government website isn't great. And I know there was a period, I think it was between 2018 and 2019, where there was an overcount of data that was going onto the system, which meant the
Really?
figures were a little bit skewed. So it's difficult to sort of look at longer term trends, but certainly going back as far back as 2022, we can understand how many landlords were registered then, how many properties registered then, and how it looks at this at now. So that's over 3 years have passed.
I think you've definitely built the suspense on this one.
That's it. Yeah. Let's looking back. So January 2022, there was 239,566 registered landlords
Okay.
in Scotland. So, and in February 2025, the figure the Scottish Government say are registered is 236,737.
Is that
So
about
that's
3,000 left or something? Did I hear the first number
Yeah,
right?
it's gone down by
Yeah.
2,829. So over three
That's
years,
like nothing then.
it's been 3 years, and there's almost 3,000 landlords have left over three years,
The only
which
thing I would say is, and I just want to say, if anyone is watching or listening, quite often Ross and I both have the stats to hand. I don't have any information at all, so I am receiving this in the same way that you, as a listener slash viewer, is receiving it. But I want to say, is this landlord registration stats? Is this coming from landlord registration? So when a landlord sells a property that was tenanted and no longer tenanted, or whatever, nobody actively goes onto landlord registration to remove themselves, do they? Or am I wrong? And you can be on landlord registration for 3 years.
yeah, some people do. Some people will go on and maybe notify that they've sold the
Do you
property, and
see 10%, 20% of people?
possibly,
Or
but there is usually a lag, and the Scottish Government understand that there's a 3 year lag over the license. So license is granted for a period of 3 years, and even though the landlord may have had 1 year out of that and then sold the property, the Scottish Government ultimately think there's 2 more years that they've been a landlord for, which they haven't. So that information can be
slightly dated or
it
lagged
can
or
be.
whatever. Do you
Yeah.
think the landlord registration, do they have any data on new registrations? So how many new registrations have there been since 2022?
They possibly do, but they don't publish them, or I've not come across them.
Interesting to
I
see.
only see the number of registered landlords
And then and
and
then then we could guess at some other stuff. But anyway, I sorry going off piste a little bit in regards to landlord registration, Ross.
so that was the number of landlords that are registered, and it's gone down by almost 3,000. So the other bit of data on this spreadsheet is to do with the number of registered properties in Scotland. So back in January 2022, just over 3 years ago, there was 339,525 registered properties, say the Scottish Government. And that number in February 2025 was 350,824. So that's an increase of 11,299 properties. So it's gone
What
up.
is going on?
I don't know. I don't know. Don't know what this means. So landlords are going down, properties are going up.
Well, it's more portfolio landlords. So
Yes,
there
quite
are more
possibly.
landlords that have large portfolios, and I wonder, if there's any institutional stuff in there, but certainly, professional landlords, big portfolios.
So it probably taps onto that. That the majority of people,
Yeah.
of landlords, have either 1 or 2 properties, and these are the landlords that are selling, and it's the landlords that are in it sort of for the long term. The portfolio landlords that have not massive amount of properties, but they have a slightly more than 1 or 2 properties
Yeah,
that
six,
are
seven, eight,
holding
nine,
on. Yeah.
10, what more? Yeah, 50, whatever. Big, some bigger, some smaller. But okay,
Uh,
so I
But I
mean,
don't, I actually don't know what to make of these numbers, because ultimately we were told that property landlords leaving the market, number of properties were significantly down, and therefore rents went up. But there's obviously another story here. The story might be that the Scottish government's data is outdated. The data they're publishing is outdated and doesn't represent, or hasn't represented, the
we
what's
speak
happening.
we speak to a lot of letting agents, don't we? Of course, and sort of landlords and everyone in the private rented sector, and the narrative is, the anecdotal stuff is always that letting agents are being contacted by their client base, by their by the landlords more than before about selling. It seems that there are still some new landlords coming onto the scene, or new properties at least. But it's to grow a letting agency, not our concern obviously, but to grow a letting agency um, is harder to do organically than ever before. That's why a lot of acquisition happens, maybe, or is wanted.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so everything that we hear and stuff you read in the press is all about landlords leaving, but the stats are not backing that up. But so who knows? But if they were leaving before, Ross, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and they're leaving in their droves, do you think that they will still be leaving for the same reasons or different reasons, or what? What do you think?
Well, we've just gone past the 1st of January, first of April date, which allowed landlords to increase the rent. It brought to an end the period of COVID and the cost of living crisis, where there's temporary legislation that was in place that impacted a lot of landlords and their ability to manage their annual rental income for sitting tenants. At a time when there was a lot of pressures on them with increased mortgage costs,
Yeah,
increased maintenance costs, etc. So
yeah.
that's obviously good news to landlords that has been lifted. There's the rent cap or rent pressure zones looks like it might come into force at some point in the next 2 years. Well, maybe it won't be for 2 years, so the landlords will have a good outlook for the next couple of years, at least until they understand what this is going to look like. the other issue for landlords coming
Don't mention it.
coming down the
Talk
tracks,
about it
what
all the time.
we do talk about all the
You're
time
going to say
is
EPCs.
I'm going to say EPCs, yeah,
Oh,
because it is something that's a lot of people we speak to on a regular basis, whether it be people that are buying properties are
yeah.
asking about, what EPC rating is it, what potential can it get to, and how is it going to impact on when the minimum standard comes in. And is we always bat it back to say, there is no minimum standard at this moment in time. It is likely that at some point next year that will be clarified. We'll finally understand, after about asking for about 10, 15 years, it feels like, what will be the minimum standard be for an EPC rating for a rental property. And that will eventually filter through to private homeowners who will be looking to sell their property and will have to be required to get to the minimum standard.
I have a, sorry, carry on.
So yeah, go for it.
Well, I had a silly anecdote, really. You were giving some quality information.
Yeah, how silly is it? Is it quite silly?
Well, it's not too silly, but I was making coffee in the sort of the breakout area within the office that we work in earlier today,
Mm-hmm.
and the lady making she's actually washing something, but she turned around and she said, "Oh, I think you do this," and I said, "Yeah, pretty much," and she said, "I'm going to be a landlord, and I've been told do all landlords need to get good loft insulation?" So I was like, "Well, not exactly, but." It's to do with EPCs, I guess. You need to have
Yeah.
good energy efficiency within your property. So they're just an example of people not quite knowing, what the legislation is and getting bits of information. So that was all really.
Yeah, yeah, and in the run up to that,
Yeah,
there's a couple of changes happening with EPC. So they're changing the actual EPC template that
yeah,
surveyors are going to be using. That's happening this year. Then next year, I think they're actually changing the way that EPCs are calculated, and then the following year will be the minimum standards. So it's just it's, so are landlords leaving because all the various legislation changes? Possibly. The people we speak to, and because we've run letting agencies before, doing portfolios, we understand that there's always been landlords leaving the market because of various reasons. A lot
yeah,
of them is a case of getting to retirement, and I'm not certain that the main reason somebody comes to us to say, "I've just had enough. The legislation is just too much for me. I can't. It's not worth it anymore." Blah blah blah. But it's just, I suppose, it's something that they're aware of. They've always had to put up with the fact that the legislation's always in the tenant's favour, and there's always a change in legislation. But I'm not sure it's enough to sort of force them into selling up. But every
yeah.
circumstances are different.
Yeah, it's the accidental landlord. It's the landlord that maybe just only going to have one property. I think that when they see the amount of, again, referring back to this conversation I had today with the lady in the breakout area, that she didn't realize how much she would have to do to get her property ready for the market. She's only letting it out because she's bought a new place and she doesn't want to sell it just now. She wants to hold on to it. So, but again, that I guess over the years, that's you know, people have often thought, "Oh, I didn't realize there was so much involved."
Yeah,
There's always been something involved, and it depends on your expectations. But yeah, I don't know either. I mean, obviously, there's other market forces, cost of living, and just other things that might force people to sell. But the professional landlords, I think, won't. I think that they'll hold on to it and look to continue to expand their portfolios. Hence, some of the stats you mentioned.
yeah. Under this video, we'll put a link to the stats that we're reading at this moment in time, because I don't want anybody thinking we're making this up, because it does seem like pretty crazy stats compared to what we've been hearing, listening to, and what everybody's saying to us. And we appreciate these stats will be skewed a little bit by that 3-year registration, and it might be the case that
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about anybody that sold their property just at the start of 2022 might still be on that register at this moment in time, and they might then fall off later in the year. So it's a case of keeping an eye on these stats and see what they look like later in the year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll put a note in our diary to check them in sort of March 2026.
Yeah, good. Yeah. It was good. It was good. Yeah, good shout out to that woman that you bumped into in the kitchen. She's played a pivotal role in this
Yeah,
Just Ross and Chris.
yeah, it just adds a bit of light and shade, I thought, Ross. Anything,
Indeed.
any other stats you want to share or anything else?
That's it. That's it. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what if we do receive any comments on the bottom of this video about these stats. But we'll certainly put it out there and see what
Yeah.
people think.
All right. Well, been great to chat about it. Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, and
See you
Chris.
later. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.